Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy, and governance. I am Musa Salmanu. Now, over 450 persons, including women and children, were abducted by non-state actors within the space of 1 week in Borno, Kaduna, and Sokoto states, all in northern part of Nigeria, which has been grappling with insurgency, banditry, and other forms of terrorism that have continued to threaten food security, education, and general economic development. Though the region has witnessed other large-scale abductions of students in the past, such as the famous Chibok schoolgirls, the Dapchi students, the Federal Government College Bininyawuri, among several others, efforts to address the security breaches by the government and other measures, such as the Safe School Initiative, have failed to halt the trend, which compounds the huge education deficit in the volatile region. Now, despite spending 5 trillion naira to purchase military hardware to fight insecurity in the last quarter of 2023, Nigerian government has failed to guarantee the safety of Nigerians who are devastated by the ravaging insecurity, especially at areas considered ungovernable. Now, it is against this backdrop we'll be interfacing with a retired Air Force officer, Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired, to examine the recurring incidences of mass abductions and measures taken to address the security challenge. Now, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we commence the conversation, let's take a short break. We'll be back shortly. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us on Daily Politics. And now the conversation begins. Retired Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, you've been following the current trend, the security situation in the country, I'm sure, very closely. The disturbing one has to do with this re-emergence, if you like, or return of mass abductions, especially of school children. The one that happened in Kaduna, and then subsequently, hours later, that of Sokoto, where 15 Zangaya students were taken. Before then, we've had, the mass abduction of women in Borno, in Mborungala. So, now, why do you think this is recurring in Nigeria, despite measures that have been taken in the past?
Well, thank you so much. Like you said, these are not new patterns. We have seen them in the past, and it's just a relapse to what had been in the past. And what that shows is that perhaps some of the measures that have been taken or put in place are either not adequate or not sufficient or are not working in general. Whereas the targets that are chosen, particularly because they are soft targets to start with, because of their vulnerabilities, and therefore they become easy to either abduct or to attack. And the insurgents, or by whatever name they are, either they're insurgents or bandits or even whatever name we give them, they are very aware of that. Okay. And it's like when you have a watchman over something, the person that intends to wreak havoc on that observes where the lapses are and capitalizes on those lapses to wreak the havoc. So this is exactly what is happening when there is intensity of operations or they are being hit very well. Once there is some kind of succor or there's a gap, it gives them the opportunity to regroup, re-strategize, and hit those type of targets. Now, what is happening is that we tend to sometimes get a bit relaxed when there is successes. At the moment successes are being recorded in our efforts, thus in the response, and there is this relaxation. Everybody becomes attuned to the normality of things, and during that time, they are re-strategizing, they are regrouping, and therefore they look at those vulnerable places and attack. So that is exactly what is happening now. If we don't, when I say we here, but government and also people and other stakeholders, if we don't carefully study these patterns again and go on the offensive, I assure you this is going to happen again.
Right. Okay, we'll talk about going on the offensive, but then let's look at the measures. You talk about perhaps relaxation because of successes, even though the magnitude of the crime, if you like, before now, has generated a lot of apprehension, even global outrage, so to speak. Looking at the Chibok schoolgirls, for instance, this has been an issue that has been sustained, the campaign that has been sustained. Up to today, a number of them are still, not accounted for. So, and then measures were taken. There were military operations. There were also non-kinetic measures, like the ones I talked about, the coming together of stakeholders, the initiative aimed at, making the schools safe. It happened as part of the response to the abduction of the Chibok girls. How many years back? 10 years back. We're talking about 2014, for instance. And since then, nothing much has been done, to propel, if you like, or to kickstart this project until now, that the government is talking about, spending 15 billion naira or so. What do you make up with our commitment, if you like, or will to address some of these challenges beyond just the rhetorics?
Okay, I think we have a peculiar system around here, or peculiar problem. We are always, or almost always, reactionary.
Okay.
And in security, your ability to forecast and preempt something, it's far better or more important than reacting to that incident. Because by the time you are reacting, it had already happened.
You're on the defensive.
You are already on the defensive. And therefore, so we have a society whereby when something happens, like you said, rightly said, when Chibok happened, and Dapchi and so many other kidnappings, mass adoptions, then everybody, because it's in the eye of the news, the eye of the storm, then everybody gets involved, everybody gets to talk, and there are so much talks going around. But immediately it gets off the public view, everybody relapses, everybody relaxes. And another second thing is that I think we have this penchant to always think that when there's something, the first thing we do is to throw money at it. So you hear us talk about 15 billion or any amount. There
was initial pledge of $10 million by the government,
yes,
and another 10 million by partners.
Yes. For as long as, whereas money is very important, but what is done with that money is equally important, if not more important. We can get all the money that we want, but if we don't have a strategy, which, to be fair, there are a lot of declarations, the Safe School declarations, the Safe School initiative, and so on and so forth. But it's far beyond rhetorics. It has to be the issue of that the stakeholders or the implementers even understand the scope of the problem and understand their role in curbing that problem. Now, if we look at the stakeholders, whether it's the Ministry of Education, whether it's the private sector, or even the security agencies, have we done a holistic overview of what our capacity or capabilities and what is needed to ensure that this security is provided? If you look at the setup of our schools generally, apart from the schools within the city centers, most of these schools, for peculiar, because you need space and so on, are out somehow slightly out of the city centers, a bit distant. And if you look at basic things like in terms of the perimeter fence and so on and so forth, some of those things are lacking. And up to today, they are even 10 years, like you said, after these mass kidnappings, we still have those peculiarities. We have, like in the case of the Kuriga
primary school, right?
Primary school and secondary school, junior secondary school, you find out that the nearest security checkpoint is about 40 kilometers or thereabouts.
From that.
Or away from that. Kuriga itself does not have a police outfit and so on and so forth. So when there is that mass concentration of people vulnerable, there must be plan to secure them.
Yes. Okay, talking about plans, just like you mentioned the Kuriga, beyond just being within the theater of operation, because Chikun is within the theater of operation. This banditry and all of that has affected significantly, areas in Chikun, also perhaps because of their closeness to Benungwari and so on, And then the security agencies and the governments are aware of if you like, the contagious nature of these communities. Yet they are left vulnerable, just like we said. Now, no security presence, no measures taken to safeguard these children. Within that same radius, if you like, was the abduction of, the students along this university, this private university, along that same area, which took place. And so it appears that when things happen, we talk over it, and then nobody takes the necessary steps to safeguard other vulnerable areas. Why is it so?
Because, to be direct, there are no consequences, or no far-reaching consequences when things happen. Okay. Just like you rightly said, when things happen, there are talk shows, and we make a lot of pronouncements and so on. But it dies off till the next incidents happen. Then we're going to repeat the same sequence again, and we wait again till the next one. Now the question you have to make is that who are those that have responsibility? Yeah. There are several questions. Have they been equipped and trained for that? Yeah. So if the answer is yes, then when such things happen, what are the explanations? Are the explanations far-reaching or kind of convincing enough? If they are not, what are the consequences? What happened when this happened? When happened, what are the, for every action, there should be a reaction. That's right. So when there are not that, honestly, there is that, it's a human nature that we feel, well, it happened yesterday.
It's normal.
Nothing happened. Yeah. It will happen again. Nothing, we'll get away with it. Right. So until a time that whereby there is accountability on all stakeholders. Right. If it's schools, for example, the Ministry of Education, I'm just giving an example, Ministry of Education, what did you do some kind of risk assessment in those schools? Was there any risk assessment conducted? If there was risk assessment, what were the risks that were identified? Right. What were the measures that were put in place to mitigate those risks? Right.
Like the case of Kuriga, I learned that at some point the students were moved away from that vicinity.
Yes.
We were taken to the main town, at least because of the vulnerability. But what happened that they were taken back again, and under whose instruction and all of that? This is part of the accountability perhaps you are talking about.
Yes, and again, if you look at that, the vulnerability or the index is high in that Kuriga starting. It's actually, I think, in Igabi.
Chikun
okay. So it's high around that general area, Udua and the rest, up to when you reach Benungwari. Yes. So the security measures or the assessment should have indicated that the risk is higher. Now, when the risk is high, depending on the risk, then you must put in place measures that can counter those risks.
Mitigate, that's right.
The higher they are, the more measures that you have to put in place. Yeah. If we know that it's an area that is prone to attacks, that is prone to kidnappings and so on and so forth, and not to succumb to the whims of the bandits and the rest, we say that we have to resist. So we have to improve the resilience. For example, we have to put in place physical security measures to ensure higher than other places. Right. We have to put in place early warning systems that ensure that when there is such an attack or before it happens, there are ways of picking out signals that something is about happening. So there should be a response or preemptive strike or something. And when it happens, or if something, all those measures put in place, something happens, what is the response arrangement? How long does it take to respond from when something happens? And how is it communicated to those that have the responsibility to respond? And how early do they respond to that? Because in that is where the opportunities are lost. That's right. Once there is slow response and there is no quick response, every hour counts. Yeah.
Is it a case of lack of coordination, or is it that the manpower has been overstretched, that it can cover those areas. So today we're talking about ungovernable spaces. These are the kind of ungovernable spaces we're talking about. If, for instance, an entire community like Kuriga doesn't have a security presence, and then bandits will strike, abduct mass number of school children,
operate freely,
and then move freely without any. What happens to the air reconnaissance and all of that?
So it's a combination of all the factors that you have said. Sometimes there could be lack of coordination, and there could be insufficient numbers, and there could be lack of responsive or immediate response that exacerbate that. Now, if you find out there are so many actors within the security space, whether it's the vigilante, the community,
the local community,
the local, they say, or at the state level, you have, in case of Kaduna, you have the Kaduna Vigilantes Service, and the police and the military. All those layers, you find out that even though there are a lot of improvements from what used to happen, but we are not yet there. There is no that collaboration. There is no that effective communication between, or synergy between both. Because if there was, the information about this, first of all, there could have been some kind of picking up signals that there is something happening.
About to happen.
So the security, security gathering or intelligence gathering mechanism is completely dead. How do they, because you asked the reverse, how are they able to plan to observe the patterns and effectively conduct operations? Why we seem to be reacting? So it seems, or it means that there is a gap somewhere in terms of our ability to gather those intelligence. And if we have the intelligence, our ability to respond proactively in a way that prevents this occurrence from happening.
Because some will say perhaps it might not be the case of lack of intelligence. For instance, the same Safe School initiative is telling Nigerians, through the federal government, that states, schools in 14 states, including FCT Abuja, are at risk of some of these attacks. Going by the risk assessment that was carried out. So if that is the situation, and the government has this at its disposal, what stops them from taking the necessary steps, to protect some of these vulnerable?
So sometimes there is, and with all due respect to those that are involved in that, there's the issue of providing that there is risk somewhere. But there's also the issue of providing what the solutions are, practical solutions. Now, if we have 14 schools that are at risk.
Yes, states, schools across 14 states.
Okay, schools across 14,
including the FCT.
Including the FCT. If the initiative comes up with that figure and the rest, you have two options. Now you can close up all those schools. And you remember that schools are done in a way that they are close to the communities, especially the day schools, where students could commute day in and day out. Now you could close those schools, and that increases the number of out of schools. Now you could the other way will be to kind of find a solution whereby the school is going on, but in an environment that is highly safe. Yes, that is safe, that is protected.
Yeah, I've seen an initiative somewhere, I think in Nasarawa. At some point, I was there for an assignment, and I realized, schools that are vulnerable, the state government now, close them, just like you said, but then create an avenue where the students are taught, at home, thereabout. There are certain measures taken to get the teachers, if you like, to meet them at their own yes. So that could be another, another strategy.
But that shouldn't be a permanent strategy.
Yeah, maybe a stopgap.
So there must be a continuous evaluation and re-evaluation of the situation. We had situations whereby during Corona, for example, people or schools were still, though closed physically, but there were efforts to kind of ensure that students do not lose a lot of their. So we could adopt those measures. There are a whole of literatures and a lot of practical issues to be handled in education in emergencies. These are not entirely new issues. There have been issues of when there are emergencies, what happened to school? When students cannot safely go to school for one reason or the other, what do we do? What are the alternatives? So there's should be a kind of mix of all that. Whereas where we ensure that, or we make efforts to ensure that physical security is there so that students could go back to school and learn, there must be also temporary arrangements to ensure that when a place becomes, based on assessments, the risk goes very high, that other methods can be adopted to ensure that students do not lose out, and you do not unnecessarily expose them to danger, because for parents, for a kid to go to school and get adopted, they would rather keep them at home. The incentive to push them to school would not be there. So you have to adopt, or there must be measures that ensure that students or pupils are able to learn. When the risk is so high, other alternatives means have to be taken, but also to ensure that physical measures are met. So the issue of number is there. The issue of monitoring, the issue of surveillance and so on are there. An issue of capacity to respond effectively when this happens.
Right, okay, looking at the impact this is making on education in particular. This is a region that is grappling with a huge number of out-of-school children, among the 20, there are around 20 million out of school, so to speak, because the number keep growing.
Yes.
Substantial part of this, maybe 60-70% domicile in the north. And these are some of the states that are currently facing these challenges. Students are out of school as a result of insecurity. It also, even before then, a number of them are out of school because the parents could not afford to send them to school. I've seen a number of, again, talking about my experience, at some point I was in Niger State, a significant number, I think almost 40 or thereabout, if I'm not mistaken, or more than that, of the schools in that state have been closed. So you can imagine the number of children that are out of school as a result of that. And then this happened across, the states. And these attacks are still happening in the northeast, in the north central, and in the northwest. What happened to the future of education in this part of the country?
It's obviously bleak. That's the truth. There's no, if this continues, it has been happening since far back when Boko Haram started, 2009, and it keeps widening, it keeps expanding. The reality is that the numbers are going to grow. They are going to multiply continuously. Now, the only way we can do something about it is to find other alternatives, ways of making sure that these students are taught. Not if the schools cannot be protected, physical schooling cannot be protected. There must be a combination of all measures and methods. So that
to reach out
to the number and ensure that we make deliberate efforts to ensure. So it has to do in terms of infrastructure. It doesn't have to be necessarily physical infrastructure. It could be ways of ensuring technology and so on and so on to have that multiplier effect. It has to be also in terms of getting everybody involved. And honestly, also making sure that it goes beyond talks every day. We have summits in northern states meet every day to talk about issues and also attacking the fundamental issues, which is issues of, or the underlying issues, which are issues of poverty.
The social issues.
Social issues that exacerbate all this. Exactly. So until all that is done, kind of a whole of sector or whole of government approach to ensure that both communities, both socio-economic issues, underlying factors, and everything is done to ensure that students are able to learn, whether physically in school or not in school, learning continues in a way that does not increase the number of students that are already out of school.
Right, okay, let's come back to the kinetic measure. Now, for instance, the military operations, some would say they are overstretched looking at the number of operations across the country. But the spokesperson, if you like, of the presidency, spokesman of one of the spokespersons of the presidency was talking about how they were able to address, the insecurity in the north, in the southwest, and also in the southeast, for instance. But then, while that is happening, the vulnerable areas, or the vulnerable region, which is the north fundamentally, has not been properly secured, so to speak. And this today we are seeing also affecting the level of food insecurity we are facing in the country. And one wonders, if there is need to tinker with the entire security arrangement, I want to use architecture or so, to be able to address this fundamental problem. Some say there is need to bring in, communities have to be involved, traditional institutions have to be involved. Now there is conversation around the state policing and all of that. How do we expand, if there is need, the security network to be able to address this problem?
So, first of all, there's the issue of the number. The military, not traditionally trained to do what it's expected to do, is also overstretched because it's in internal security deployments in almost all the states of the Federation, including the FCT.
That's right.
And now this is something that is not traditionally a military thing. The military is supposed to get in when it reaches a stage, stabilize the issues, and pull back. Now, but we have deployed them continuously.
They have taken over
the
job
police,
of
the police and every other
authorities,
person. Because if you hear when there is an issue and the response, one of the response that is always suggested when it is that a military barracks should be established. It's suggested now in Kaduna. It has been suggested in so many other places. So the question is, how long can we, or how far can we stretch?
Continue to militarize the
community. And so. Yes, there is the fact that we need to improve numbers, increase number of the military. That's one.
The foot on the foot. So the boots on ground. Yeah.
And also improve in their capacity to respond. Also, that's in terms of hardware and so on and so forth, and training, mobility, and so on. But there's also the need to look at the other components of security. Community policing, for example. We have the issue of, apart from the community, yes, there's the issue of, but there are the federal agencies that are charged with also internal security.
Like the civil defense.
Like the police. There are so many others that take those. Now, sometimes we take away that, we don't beam the satellites on them also as they need to be. Because, and it goes back to what we talked about, the responsibility. If people are held accountable and are held responsible for certain issues, then they have to come inwards to also reject their own systems. The fact is that, to a large extent, all the security agencies or institutions have some level of, will I call it, independence. What do I mean? They have a level of, they recruit, a lot of them, whatever, they are not under any, to the level to which the budgets are approved and so on and so forth. They have the leverage.
They have access to their funding. And
I can't test to that, but I know that they they do recruitments year in, year out, and so on. So, and they, to a large extent, also expand within their own. So what we can look at is that holistically review those numbers. There has been a lot of talks about the issue of numbers.
But the capacity issue too has been fundamental. I think the reason why the military had to step in at that point in time was to say that the civil authorities have failed. It has become beyond them.
Yeah, but for how long? If it was just a stopgap measure, it is becoming permanent. If, for example, it came, we started with Boko Haram and the rest as an interim measure. From then till now, this is how many years now? It's becoming, the military is becoming a permanent fixture of the internal security architecture of the country, which shouldn't be.
Which has displaced even the primary.
Exactly, has displaced the primary, and they are now taking a look-back status, and sometimes even, I dare to say, step back and fold hands.
Also sabotage. And how do we do it? Let's see, and all of that. Well, it manifests in the kind of, how do you call it, the military, the interagency collaboration. We've seen a lot of that, infighting and all of that between the security agencies and so. Perhaps it revolves around that. Okay, you are here to take our jobs and all of that. But then we have security chiefs, The Office of the National Security Advisor is there to coordinate, to ensure that this synergy is working. But as it is, we haven't seen much of that happening. And then again, you talked about revisiting or reviewing the security situation, at interval to see where we're not getting it right. We've had some changes in the military architecture in terms of the leadership, for instance. During President Buhari, so much cry about the need to change the service chiefs and all of that, they were changed. And then the ones changed were also changed not long ago. So what has changed? That's what Nigerians should be asking.
Well, what has changed, yes, is good, is important to once in a time to change the leadership, because it brings in new thinking. It brings in a lot of newer ideas or fresh ideas on board, and so on and so forth. But what needs to change is the way we look at security in its entirety. That we don't only consider, and the Chief of Defense Staff has been very vocal about this, that it's not the militarized version of security that we should only do. There's so much the military could do. What about, as he put it, good governance? Are we providing component? Yes, those are the critical, because they provide the push factors, the push and pull factors. When people do not have, when they cannot look and aspire to something, when they feel, when there is that despondency, yes, when there is that, and there is resource and so on and so forth, there is the tendency that they resolve to this. Now, when we solve this underlying factors, then it's easy to separate criminality. There will always be the criminal aspects of it. But there are these that are pushed into this because of subsistent factors that are there. So there is the need for increased or improved
good governance,
issue of governance, issue of poverty, issue of addressing all those things that affect the people in the grassroots. And because that's the only way that you can reduce the number of people that are pushed to join in those forces.
Right. Just like someone was talking about the need to address security for you to have food security, because fundamentally, if you don't address security issues, you continue to have food insecurity, because the farming communities are the ones that are vulnerable. They've been displaced, and who is going to farm? Certainly, we'll have to continue with this hunger until we address some of these fundamental problems. Looking back at, yes, those at the governance level, those at the hem of affairs are there. They keep pushing the money, as they say. In the background, I talked about 5 trillion naira that was spent, in just the last quarter of 2023 to acquire military hardware. Is it what is needed? At some point there was this analysis that in every bomb you drop, at a community, you're spending millions of naira. That millions of naira you're dropping in the community, targeting non-state actors. If that millions of naira is pushed to that community that is lacking water, lacking healthcare, and all of that, perhaps the problem would have been solved.
So it's a kind of egg or chicken on egg, or some, which one comes first? Because you need some level of stability to provide those things. So whereas it's important that you inject into the issue of the hardware and so on, but there is also the corresponding need to inject those developmental issues. Because like you said, yes, it's cost so much to buy any equipment that you're thinking of. And those equipments are going to be dropped in places that do not even have water or anything.
Healthcare,
and if you look at it, cost naira, side by side naira, it's cheaper, for example, to provide a borehole than to send, to send a personnel carrier to a village, for example. But there are the short-term measures and long-term measures. In the short term, you have to stabilize those communities so that those amenities, when they are brought, they can be enjoyed, so that the people can go back to their normal life, or to the communities to enjoy those facilities. That is where the issue of the hardware comes in. But while you are doing that, you must never forget the issue of the software, which is issues of human security, the water, the education, and so on. So they must go side by side. So while we say that we have spent so much on procuring hardware, or
can imagine what 5 trillion naira could do.
So we have to put side by side, what are we doing in procuring services, in procuring facilities or amenities to those communities. Because until we do that, whatever peace that we have, or relative peace that is there, is not sustainable. People will still go back because those factors are still there, and they will now be the measures that will pull them into those groups.
Okay, looking back at the deterrence measure, yes, we have to give it to the security agencies. They've been trying in recent times until the deterioration that is coming in now, in terms of dealing with the situation. A number of some of these non-state actors were neutralized. A number of people have been recovered, if you like, or have been
rescued,
freed,
yes,
if you like, rescued and all. We've seen that happening, But then it is becoming something else, within even those at the helm of office, the political elites. Now there has been this, some would say, very dangerous pattern, trying to politicize the security issues. It is also coming from the presidency, when perhaps someone is talking about regional forces fueling the crisis, to undermine government or to do certain things. To what extent do you think this world set us back in terms of the collective effort to deal with this situation?
So in everything that the political atmosphere sets the tone for everything. So yes, it's important that we see security as everybody's business and everybody's concern. And whether you're in opposition or you're in government, that because you're working towards being in government someday, and if we have to have a country first before we can think of any other thing,
or whatever.
Whether it's politics and so on. So yes, there's the need to avoid politicizing every security issue. However, there is also the need for us to stop seeing any kind of contrary view as being an attack. Because it's only when we have divergent views, we have contrary views, that we can come together to solve the problem. Everybody must kind of patriotically, if I put it, or with all that zeal, whatever you're saying, it shouldn't be because you're trying to, point at the failures of someone, but it's because you want to offer solutions for a better Nigeria. Yes. We must avoid a situation whereby it's viewed from purely political lenses. Because that exacerbates the situation, and that ensures that any response that it's thought of will die naturally. But at the same time, there must be political will.
Maybe a convergence of all the there should be a consensus among the political
elite to ensure that there is unity in effort. When there is an attack, it's an attack on everyone. It doesn't matter what party, it doesn't matter which political ideology or view the person holds. These guys do not care what you have, and the insecurity affects everyone.
Part of the rhetorics, part of the blame game, has been over time, has been that there are certain people who are financing terrorism. At some point, we've had a number, several attempts to unveil them or to unmask them, but we haven't seen any of that. And if the government has at its disposal, those who are supposedly financing this terrorism that we're talking about, then what stops, what stops them from, summoning the will? Perhaps to say, okay, let's put a stop to this, or those that have been found wanting, or those that have been arrested. Nigerians would want to see, some level of prosecution, conviction, and so on. But then all of this has not been happening. So what happened with the deterrence measure?
Well, when you talk about issue of consequence and issue of holding people accountable and so on, it's in all ramifications. And in terms of if we think, or if there are evidence that someone is behind this, it doesn't matter how highly placed that person is. And it also goes to the fact that we have to, that's the elite now, we have to ensure that these things are not politicized. Now, there must be a very clear or a very clean job at getting these evidences. There shouldn't be doubt. When someone is being accused of something, that means there is enough or sufficient evidence that is there to ensure that that person can be prosecuted. Now we have instances where people are announced to have been found to be either, and it dies Or it's when they are taken to court, then the investigation starts and so on. So I think there's also need for the investigative agencies and those responsible to that to do a clean job of this. If there is that connection and it's clearly visible that that person is connected with, then I think there must be the political will to charge them to court accordingly.
Right. Okay, now talking about community efforts, because we cannot address this without involving the communities, especially this attack on sub-targets. But there has been this also gap in terms of trust. You know, there's trust deficit between the communities, that is the public and even the security agencies in most cases. Now, how do we create or galvanize this synergy, this collaborative effort, you know, to deal, because intelligence largely could also be obtained from the local communities, that is, if the channel of communication is flawless. How do we get this community involvement in addressing the problem?
So it's a two-way thing, because there is this distrust, like you said, between the communities and security actors. And now this distrust is not far-fetched from the fact, the way the community, the security actors behave towards the communities. And that's why we keep making efforts in terms of, or kind of to sensitize on both sides, that the security actors have a responsibility to protect the communities in which they operate. Protection of civilians, therefore, must be a major preoccupation of the security actors. Now, the way you interact with people when you are deployed there, the way the countenance towards your countenance towards them will either elicit information, or they can even volunteer information. How safe do they feel when you are there? Yes. Do they feel that you are
you're there to protect them?
You are there to protect them, or you're there to add sorrows to their already sorrowful situation. So security actors have a very big role to play in ensuring that they win that trust of the communities. Now, communities on their side also have to understand that these security actors are there to protect them, and that they cannot do this job without information from them who are members of that community. They are the ones that know who is there, who is a stranger, what are the strange movements that have happened, and so on. So it's a two-way thing, actually. Security actors have to improve in their outward, in their outward actions and so on towards communities, and communities have to understand that these security actors are there to protect them. They should be working together.
Right. We are left with, you know, charges, go after these criminals, rescue these abductees, and all of that. It all stops there in most cases. How do you see this time around? I mean, what level of commitment do you extract from these political actors now, saying that, because we're beginning to see, even though there are also denials, some involvement of international support. Kaduna, for instance, there was this back and forth with regards to involving the U.S. security intelligence to rescue the children. How you see, I mean, how would you rate the response by the subnational leaders?
Well, at the subnational leaders, that's governors now, and states at that level. There is much that they can do. I'm not absolving them of any responsibility, because these schools belong to the states. And whereas we say we clearly, or we want to show, or a lot of times we say that the governors have their hands tied, it's not entirely so. Because where we have interest to protect, they are protected. Now, so what is happening is that we must improve or increase capacity. Capacity in terms of, at the federal level, that's ensuring that more policemen are recruited and trained and armed, or not armed with weapons. It could be even with walkie-talkies and communication facilities.
That's right.
And we have to ensure that at the state levels, they have to ensure that communities are acquainted with measures or means of communicating when there is something. There are agencies, or there are mechanisms that are set up to ensure that information comes in, and that could be communicated to those agencies that are responsible for that.
Right. Thank you very much, retired Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, for your informed perspectives on this issue. We really appreciate your coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And viewers, that's a wrap on today's package of Daily Politics. We sincerely hope you found the conversation engaging and informative. And be sure to join Daily Politics live airing every weekday and also our social package on Friday, during which we open our telephone line for you to comment on national issues. Once again, I'm Musa Salmanu, thanking you for staying with us.